Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Lucy Tassell.
A landmark report from the United Nations Children's Fund, aka UNICEF, has found that young people are experiencing concerningly high rates of discrimination. They're feeling increasingly disconnected from their communities and concerned about their futures, while developmental outcomes also show the youngest Aussies are falling the furthest behind.
By the time they start school, only half of Australian children are meeting key developmental metrics, including physical health, social and cognitive outcomes. That's according to UNICEF's findings.
So, what are the barriers to better outcomes and what needs to change? Well, to find out more, we are speaking to an expert today, Nicole Breeze. Nicole is UNICEF Australia's Chief Advocate for Children, and she joins me now. Nicole Breeze, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. We are talking about UNICEF's inaugural report on the lives of young Australians. Before we dig into the findings, can you give us a top-line explainer on the purpose and the scope of this report?
Yeah, every child in every family in every community is born with the potential to thrive if they get the right supports. And Australia has all of the conditions for this to be one of the best places in the world for children and young people to grow up. What our report does is bring together data from 100 different sources. And we've also listened extensively to young Australians and to children as young as 3 throughout the process. And really, the report is a tool for action, Emma. It really helps us to see the whole picture for children and young people across all the aspects of their lives, which are important, and helps us understand how they're going.
What have young people told you is most important to them? What do they care about?
Well, when you listen to teens, Australian teens, the most significant thing on their mind when they think about their future is financial security and housing security. When they think ahead, this is the number one concern occupying their minds. So that's really front and centre for our young people at this point in time.
I was startled by a stat about exactly what you've described, housing affordability, that 41% of young people said that they would want to make housing more affordable if they were in charge. What's the impact of young people carrying such adult burdens, I suppose, at such a very early stage of their life? You know, you would think most young people hopefully wouldn't be thinking about those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is worrying, and it's a wake-up call for us. The other thing that struck me in this is less than 1/3 of our young people describe themselves as very optimistic about the next 5 years. So that's only 1 in 3. So, and I think you're right, Emma. You know, with this sense of burden and these challenging issues on their minds, what we can see is that this is weighing them down, and it's denting their optimism and outlook for the future.
The report says that Australia has all the economic, social and political conditions needed for every child to thrive, but the findings paint a picture that tells us not every child is thriving and, in fact, far from it. What are some of the key disconnects there? Can you tell us about the key findings around inequalities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you can see through this research is that, unfortunately, life is getting harder for children and young people who are already facing significant challenges. So one of the most startling findings in the report, or stats in the report for me, is that children who are living in out-of-home care, and we know the vast majority of these children and young people are in fact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people, about 1/3 of them will become homeless within a year. So for me, that's really illustrative of this kind of thing that we're seeing, that for those already encountering challenges, things are getting harder. But what I'd add to that, Emma, is that we're actually seeing emerging challenges right across the population here. Things from escalating mental health concerns, really across all households, across all demographics. More than about 1 in 5 teens now are reporting high levels of psychological distress. There are other sets of trends, but, I think this is the key thing. It's getting harder for those already experiencing challenges, but we're seeing seeing these challenges now being encountered much more broadly. Just if I can come to your question on the disconnect here, and you're absolutely right. We've got accessible health and education systems. We've got a resilient economy. But I think what we aren't necessarily getting right all the time, firstly, it's our focus on prevention, early intervention, and ensuring that all children, regardless of their postcode, who they are, where they live, them and their families are able to connect with accessible support early in life when they need it. So that's one of the key things that I think we've got to look at changing the dial on.
That figure about First Nations youth homelessness is particularly startling. Many experts, researchers, politicians continue to ask, why these gaps persist despite years of policy attention. Did your report gleam any light on that issue?
We know that, there are so many strengths in our First Nations communities, connection to culture, to family, to identity. And we know that the solutions here lie in really the ability of First Nations communities to be highly engaged in the design of policies, programs and support systems that are intended to provide the necessary support. So I'm not sure that our report has shed any new lights on what needs to happen. But again, it just reveals, again, through the sort of statistics that we've still got a way to go in terms of really getting this targeting right and respecting and enabling the leadership from our First Nations communities.
You've also shared some data with TDA about safety and belonging, which I found fascinating. 1 in 3 young people feel they don't belong in their community most or all of the time. What does that mean in practical terms?
Hi, I'm Ola.
And I'm Elliot.
We're the 2-person team behind everything video and audio here at the Daily Aus.
If you want to help us grow so we can deliver more of the content that you love, be sure to hit subscribe.
Now let's get back to the video.
Yeah, well, I think also kind of related to that reality of belonging, I think also what young Australians are reporting is that 30% of them have experienced discrimination. That's across the population. And that sort of percentage gets a bit higher when we're looking at First Nations communities, that's 41%, and also children and young people with a disability. So I think when sort of probed a bit as to what's going on here, children and young people talk about sort of the most significant reasons for that. They're sort of encountering sort of comments and discrimination about physical appearance, about race, about age and about gender. And what we know is a sense of belonging is just so vital to children and young people's well-being. And it's so critical that we get this right. And I think, these challenges do start to translate for us in some of these issues we're seeing with escalating mental health concerns amongst our children and young people as well. I think these dimensions are so closely correlated.
When we think about, vulnerable young people, minority groups, is there any findings relating to, gender diverse and LGBTQ plus children and the impacts of perhaps the rhetoric that maybe they're seeing in the media over recent years, the kind of harmful conversations going on the more conservative side of politics, perhaps?
Yeah, look, I think unfortunately our LGBTQA plus young people are reporting higher rates of discrimination in our research as well. And in a recent survey that was run by Minus 18, an amazing organisation supporting the wellbeing of young people in that community, only about a quarter of young people who identify as sexually or gender diverse describe themselves as out to most or all of their families. So again, I think this does kind of indicate to us that we have got more to do with respect to really recognising the importance of culture and identity and diversity for all of our young people as so central to healthy development and wellbeing.
So we've heard some really concerning outcomes and attitudes regarding the social conditions of life for young Aussies across a really broad age group. But I'm interested in hearing a bit about UNICEF's ideas for what comes next. What are some of the recommendations in this report to address these challenges?
Well, firstly, we really believe we need stronger national leadership. Every child, regardless of who they are and where they live, are entitled to the same standards of well-being. And what we need to do is elevate this much more centrally as a priority. Now, we do have some strengths to build on, and there has been progress made for sure. And I think a good example of that is in the early childhood education and care lane, where we are seeing accelerating rates of enrolment and participation because we've had that focus, because we've had that coordination, because we've had that leadership. So that's our first kind of call, is really we need a national plan of action for children. And that's not a plan for children's protection in isolation to their health, in isolation to their learning. We actually have to put children right in the centre here. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we've got to get things right in terms of this investment in prevention, early intervention and support. Families across the country are doing the best they can. Our parents and caregivers are doing everything they can to support their children and young people, but the pressures on families are rising, and we see this strongly in our support. And what we've got to do is, this is not an exercise in telling parents and caregivers what they need to do. It's about better listening and understanding to what they need and calibrating support systems so they can access them early and so that they meet their needs. So it's national leadership, it's prevention and it's early intervention. And finally, it's the voice and participation. We know that policies and programs work best when they're developed together with the people in the community they are intended to benefit. So we have to do more to embed more systematically voice, participation and feedback into our programs designed to support our kids and our families.
As you mentioned that, I'm kind of thinking about the conversation at the moment going on nationally around youth justice, youth crime rates, particularly the legislation we've seen in places like Queensland, Victoria, the NT, the, adult time for adult crime kind of conversation. Does it concern you that there might be this generation of young people sort of being missed?
Yeah, this is a significant concern for us watching the developments in this space. I'd come back to the first thing I said to you, Emma, which is every single child, every single young person has enormous potential to thrive if they're well supported. Unfortunately, what we see in some of these policy settings, and I think this one of youth justice is a really emblematic example of it, we're chasing crises, at the end where unfortunately children, families, young people have been let down by the systems that are intended to support them. And we know that Australia's former National Children's Commissioner, Anne Hollands, did an extensive process of consultation with young Australians who are encountering the criminal justice system. And, I think the title of her report is really, really telling. It's called Help Way Earlier. And they're the words of a young person she spoke to. And he just said to her, we need help way earlier. So, and we also know all the evidence shows us that these current punitive approaches actually aren't helping us to address the problems of youth offending, because we see the rates of young people who have been in incarceration returning to incarceration. So the rates of reoffending are not reducing either. So we've got to get this targeted right, and supporting these kids, these families much earlier to get themselves on a trajectory. If kids get off to a good start and they are supported, the outlook is much brighter for them and for the wider community.
There has been positive progress in some areas, it should be noted. Early childhood education enrolment, as you've touched on, youth unemployment is down. Are these bright spots something that we can replicate in other areas? What's working?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we really come back to this and we have a sense of optimism, Emma, we really do. We know what works. You've got decades and decades of experience in leadership decades of research tell us that we know how to get these supports right around kids and young people. And as you rightly point, we see progress in some of these key areas. And consistently, what happens when things work? You've got national leadership and prioritisation. You've got a set of minimum standards that apply to all children everywhere. And you've really got this commitment to getting those investments in at the front end of the system. Early intervention changes outcomes. It saves money and it helps us to target these more equitable outcomes that we know we need. And, Australia should be, it's an amazing country we live in, but it's not okay that it's amazing for some kids and not all kids. We've got to change the situation and we can.
A perfect sentiment to end on, I think. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole. Fascinating to hear your insights.
Thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
That's it for today's deep dive. Thank you so much to Nicole Breeze for joining us. We'll be back this afternoon with the headlines. Until then, have a great day.